In this episode, we'll take a look at the GVM MB832 LED panel light. Now, as we look at this light, first note I want to make is that, first of all, I'm using two of them as a key light here. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. But the kind of headline feature on these particular lights is that they are very affordable, and yet they produce good color quality at the same time. So color quality is really important so that when you're shooting video or photos, you don't get weird color shifts that look really bad. So we'll talk about that in more detail in just a minute, but let's run through the pros first of all on the MB832. First of all, as I mentioned, very affordable bicolor LED light, which means you can tune the color between 3200 Kelvin tungsten to 5600 Kelvin daylight, and that makes it really easy to match almost any sort of existing light. So if you're trying to mix in a room where there's already some daylight streaming in, you can do that with this, or if you want to use the tungsten colored light, which generally will make I find it seems like it makes the skin tones a little bit nicer, a little bit warmer. And you can do that when you're working in a dark environment where you don't have a lot of other light coming in, or you're matching some existing tungsten colored lights in the room. I wanted to show you the behind the scenes setup here so you can see exactly what we're doing here. So behind this scrim here, this white thing that I'll talk about in just a second, we have both of the lights set up. They're both shooting through this white silk. We call this a scrim. This actually came with a 5-in-1 reflector kit. It's the inner portion of that. These are just like a $40 photography reflector kit. And the inside has this translucent white material. And what this does is by shooting the light through there, it softens it up very nicely, which is really important in most cases when you're shooting a talking head or an interview type of thing. Most people prefer the look of having a soft light on the face. It just looks more flattering. It looks nicer. So that's what we're doing here. And those lights are probably about 1.5 meters to 2 meters away from me. And then the scrim is probably just over 1 meter away from me, just so you can get a sense for how things are set up. On the backdrop here, we have a hard light that produces this very kind of distinct slash of light. And the way we do that is we're using a Fresnel light. That's a very different type of light from a soft light source like this. So it produces very kind of hard edges and very distinct kind of shaft of light type of look. So over here, we also have what my assistant likes to call a stick light. It's an LED tube light. And the nice thing about that is it wraps around the side of my face here. It produces a little bit more dimension and helps separate the subject from the background. So just wanted you to be able to see how we have things set up here and how we're lighting with the GVM. The light features a 45-degree beam angle. Now that's pretty important. A lot of people, when they're first buying their first light, don't often realize that different beam angles will give you different readings in terms of the total light output, and they'll behave a little bit differently as well. So if you want to flood an area with light, a very large area, you generally will want a wider beam angle. If you want to push the light a little bit farther and kind of keep that beam a little bit more constrained, that's where a narrower beam angle like a 45 degree is going to be helpful. So it gives you just a little bit more power in terms of being able to throw that light. And to give you a more practical example, we measured this with our Sekonic C800 spectrometer, and we found that at 1 meter away from the light, when you had the light set to 5500 Kelvin, we got a lux reading of 3840. And then if you went to 4500 Kelvin, kind of the middle way between the tungsten setting and the daylight setting, that's where you get the most light output, we got 6000 lux. Now you might ask yourself, what does that mean in practical terms? Let me tell you my camera settings here. We're shooting at 23.976 frames per second. I have the shutter set to 180 degrees, which means it's roughly the equivalent on a camera of 1/48 of a second shutter speed. We're at ISO 400, and we have both of these lights behind a scrim, and they're both set at 100% at 3200 Kelvin. And 3200 Kelvin, incidentally, is the part of the light that puts out the least amount of light. So this is, I think, very practical for talking head types of videos. And if you were willing to go up higher on your ISO, you could probably get away with just one of these lights instead of two. The dimming is continuous from 99% down to 10%. And one of the things I really like about this light is that it has an aluminum passive cooling design. There is no fan. It's not making any noise, which is great for sound. So when you're trying to record sound with your video, you're not going to get the interference of a fan. You have a couple of different options in terms of how to power the light. So first of all, it comes with an AC adapter. You can plug it into AC mains, and that will power it, of course. And then you also have two Sony L-series battery sleds. So for example, you could use NPF 970 batteries to power this. And what I noticed, what I really like as well, is that when you're powering with those NPF 970s, which are not included incidentally, it does not lose any output power. It's the same output power as if you're connected to AC power. So that's a really nice feature as well. Now, a couple of things I think a lot of people will ask. These battery sleds are not chargers, so you cannot charge your batteries in them. And it looks like you need to use both of them to power it. Now let's jump into color quality. Color quality is super important, as we alluded to at the start of the review here. The reason color quality is so important is that if you want to get natural looking results, you need to have a high quality LED light. Now, historically, when we used old incandescent lights, tungsten colored lights, those are essentially what are called black body emitters. That is to say, they have a very predictable spectral output. They could put out in a very predictable pattern across the entire spectrum. The problem with LEDs, up until more recently especially, is that they did not have a very predictable spectral output. They were all over the place. So if you bought an LED light from one brand, it'd be very different from an LED light from another brand. And then when you set it up to use it as a video or photography light, your results would be really mixed. Like you get some really strange colors. Skin tones might look really way off, or some color would stick out in a really weird way. You get what are called color rendering issues. Now, the nice thing with these is when I measure this with my Sekonic C800 spectrometer and measure what is called the spectral similarity index, comparing this light to a tungsten light when it's set to 3200 Kelvin, or to daylight when it's set to 5500 Kelvin, we got some pretty good scores. And the SSI scores came out at 3200 Kelvin, they came out at 84, and at 5500 Kelvin, they came out at 73. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? If your score drops below 70, there's a pretty good chance you're going to start experiencing some color rendering errors. That is to say, you're going to see weird colors, not necessarily across the board, but just on certain things. And that's why you can't even correct that stuff with a white balance. You have to go in and post and do secondary color corrections, which are a pain because you have to select certain parts of the image and just change those colors. It's a nightmare. So the good news is with this, especially when you're using it in tungsten, 3200 Kelvin, the color rendering is really, really good. 84 is one of the better scores I've seen. I've seen them as high as 86 on the professional grade lights, and I'm really pleased that an affordable light like this comes out with a very good score on tungsten. Now, also on daylight, it's still very, very usable at 73. I'd love to see it higher, but I've never seen a score higher than I think 76, even on professional level lights when you're shooting daylight. So this actually did pretty well there as well. In terms of build quality, we do have an aluminum alloy receiver, yoke, and the back, the passive cooling part of the light. The rest of it pretty much seems to be plastic. So it seems to have decent fit and finish, and we'll talk a little bit more about the build quality when we get to the cons. Now, this receiver is pretty nice because you can put it on a light stand in kind of a traditional fashion, just straight down, but you can also put the yoke so that it's sticking out horizontally, which gives you more flexibility in terms of aiming the light. So if you do need to point the light down or up at a steeper angle, like 45 degrees, you can do that with this receiver, which is super helpful. So those barn doors don't get in the way. There is an iOS and Android remote app which connects via Wi-Fi. Now, Wi-Fi is not my favorite because you have to connect to that network every time you want to control your lights. And once you get the app connected, it's pretty nice. Simply just sets the color, temperature, and the dimmer. Now, there is also this interesting mode if you have more than one of these lights. They call it slave mode, which I think is a really bad name. I think follow mode is a better name. But essentially what that allows you to do is control both lights with the controls on one of the lights. So as I change one of the lights, the other one follows as well. Really nice feature. That also works with the remote app. We did a quick flicker test just to make sure that we weren't getting any sort of flicker. And this often happens when you turn the lights down quite a bit. So we set it at 30% dimmer, and we set our camera to 1/785th of a second, roughly. And what we found was there was no flicker. So as long as you shoot at shutter speeds slower than that, then you're going to be just fine. The plastic barn doors are removable, but you can take them off, which is helpful sometimes. The LED panel itself, the part out of which the light comes, is 8.5 by 9.5 inches or 21.5 by 24 centimeters. And the weight of the overall unit, including the AC adapter, comes in at 5.84 pounds or 2.65 kilograms. So it's nice and lightweight, or you can put it on a very lightweight light stand, which is nice as well. The AC adapter has a 15-foot or 4.5 meter long cable if you include the lead that runs up to the light from the adapter. So that's pretty nice from the standpoint that you get a little bit of room. You don't necessarily have to bring an extension cable for every single situation. The light comes with a nylon soft bag, which also has a pocket for the AC adapter. And the great news is this light is priced at $229 US at the time of this review. You can also buy it in a 2-light kit, which comes with 2 lights, the bags, the AC adapters, plus 2 lightweight stands. Now, these stands are actually a little better than I expected. They are, quality-wise, they're made out of aluminum. They seem like they're pretty well built. They don't have the big screws sticking out, which I tend to cut my fingers on accidentally when you're trying to set them up and take them down. So it's pretty good from that standpoint. And so that's really nice that those come in that kit. And that kit is priced at the time of this review, $539 US. So really good buy. No product is perfect. Let's talk about some of the cons here. First of all, in terms of build quality, it's nice that the receiver and the yoke and the back are all aluminum alloy of some sort, but the rest of everything else is plastic. I don't know how long that's going to hold up. So my take is that just by the feel of it, it's not going to withstand a lot of rough and tumble work. So if you're going out on location a ton, you're going to have to be pretty careful with these. Even the knobs that tighten the light to the yoke seem to be screwing into plastic, and so you have to be careful not to over-tighten those, for example. So I would just be careful. I'm not saying it's really poor quality, but I'm saying that if you are going to be doing a lot of rough and tumble work, and you're going to be going on location a ton, you might want to spend a little bit more to get something a little bit more robust. If you do get the kit, the stands, as I said before, actually are quite high quality. The only thing that you need to watch on those is that the radius of the legs at their full extension is not very wide. So if you do use it outdoors, for example, it could tip over pretty easily. You'll definitely want to use some sort of sandbag or something else to weight it down a little bit. The dimmer goes to 10%, so you can't go all the way down to 1%. It's a little bit nitpicky. It's not going to be a deal breaker for everybody. Just thought you should know. The AC lead cable, the one that runs up to the light, is a little bit on the short side. So even with the included stands, if you run them up to their full height, which is about 6.5 feet, that AC adapter is then kind of dangling in the air. So that's a little awkward, not a huge deal, but just something to keep your eye on. So of all those cons, I don't really see any glaring massive issues in most circumstances for the right person. So I think this light is really for someone who's just trying to do talking head type of videos, maybe some interviews, not transported away from home a whole lot or wherever it is you're shooting. So I think for that circumstance, this is a really, really good light, and it comes in at a price that is amazing for what you're getting. So there's a look at the GVM MB832. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.